afternoon, everyone. Earlier today, I convened the National Cabinet meeting while I was at Williamstown, and I was joined by Professor Kelly, Chief Medical Officer. The National Cabinet has been meeting more regularly over the last month or so to address particularly the issues relating to the rollout of the vaccination program. And it was another very useful meeting today, as we received updates not only on the vaccination program, which Professor Kelly will speak more to, but also in addressing the very serious issues regarding the terrible pandemic breakout in India. I was able to advise, as I indicated earlier today in my remarks in Williamstown, that of the National Security Committee decision that was taken yesterday afternoon, where we noted that the biosecurity order and the pause was successfully reducing the caseload and risk regarding the arrival of persons from India, that the biosecurity order will remain in place with no change until its intended completion date of May 15, that the repatriation flights, the facilitated commercial flights that we have been running now for a considerable period of time, that assisted some 19,000, just 20,000 in fact, people who returned from India already, that they will resume on the 15th of May. Then the first flight is scheduled to leave India on the 15th of May. There'll be 3 flights coming in this month into Darwin, and that will be supported by the National Resilience Centre at Howard Springs in Darwin. That is the facility that was recommended to be established by Jane Holden's review into the quarantine system across the country. That now will have a capacity this month of 2,000 persons, up from 850. And that facility is being supported by the Commonwealth Government to the tune of around $500 million. I advise that while the pause in direct flights from India would be further reviewed next week, it was likely that the Commonwealth Government would not be resuming direct commercial flights from India, and instead invited states and territories to participate in receiving additional repatriation flights, facilitated commercial flights into their states. And I was very pleased to have the initial response straight away from New South Wales, as well as Victoria and Queensland, who indicated that they would be responding positively to that invitation. South Australia is also considering it very favourably. They have a flight which is due to come in from Malaysia on the 15th of May, I believe it is, and we anticipate that there will be people on board that flight who will have already been in Malaysia for a period of a week or two, perhaps, and they want to just carefully assess the infection rates that are coming from that flight. But I want to thank South Australia for their consideration. Western Australia will be considering. Of course, into Tasmania, there's not the opportunity for that, nor in the ACT. So I want to thank particularly New South Wales, that previously had been receiving commercial flights, direct commercial flights from India, for their very quick response, together with Victoria and Queensland. So that's doubling the amount of repatriation facilitated commercial flights that we will see this month, from 3 to we anticipate 6, but those details will be confirmed with those states and territories and those arrangements as we work together on that over the course of the next week. Those charter flights will of course be focused on bringing those Australians, citizens, residents and families who have been registered with our High Commission and Consulate offices within India, and it will also be targeting on those 900 most vulnerable of that group. I've asked DFAT to do a review of the registrations of all of those who have been registered in India to ensure that they're current, and that will assist a proper prioritisation of placing people on those flights. The charters will be undertaken by Australian crews, and they will require rapid antigen testing prior to departure. By arranging these returns to Australia through what is it is the most secure channel we can provide for, that will mitigate the risk of potentially higher rates of infections presenting on arrival in Australia, and ensure that the quarantine system will continue to be able to receive continued repatriation flights in the weeks and months ahead. Sensitive third country transit points will also be monitored very closely after the 15th of May. For the infection rates of those arriving on flights from those transit points, the arrivals and potential actions that we will undertake to mitigate the risk is particularly in Colombo. We'll be working closely with the Sri Lankan government and the airlines in Sri Lanka to ensure that we're seeking to put in place rapid antigen testing before uplift on any of those flights into Australia, and so we're working closely with them. I spoke with the Foreign Minister last night, and she's already started that process through DFAT to engage with the Sri Lankan government and with the airlines to ensure we can support those flights continuing to come to Australia. I'd also note that we'll be monitoring the flights coming in from other transit points, although in most other cases we are not anticipating, at least our advice is presently, to see significant volumes coming through those other channels. All of this is about sensibly preventing a third wave of COVID-19 here in Australia, doing that responsibly, while at the same time doing everything we can to sustainably bring Australians home from what is currently the most significant hotspot for those travelling to Australia of anywhere in the world right now. The biosecurity order is doing its job. It is doing what we intended it to do. It will run for the term that we intended it to run, and then that will be replaced by arrangements beyond that point to ensure that we can prevent a third wave. I want to thank in particular in Australia our Australian community of people who are of Indian descent, the Indian community here in Australia. I want to thank them for their patience. I want to thank them for their understanding. I want to thank them for the opportunity that we've had over the course of the last week and longer to be able to convey directly to them and explain the decisions the government has been taking. And I know that they will be welcoming the fact that these repatriation flights will be returning once again, but also that we believe we'll be able to do that because of the actions we've taken on a sustainable basis. I know also from the Foreign Minister's engagement with her counterpart in India, in London, in the last 24 hours, that Australia's support for India at this time is greatly appreciated. And there was a very positive meeting held between Foreign Minister Jaishankar and Foreign Minister Payne while they were both there for the G7 meetings in London. And in addition to that, I'll be speaking to Prime Minister Modi later today. I know that the support that has already been provided to India directly, whether it's in oxygen concentrators or respirators or PPE equipment and all of these things, has been positively received, and we intend to provide as much further assistance as we possibly can, and I look forward to discussing that with Prime Minister Modi this afternoon. On the vaccination program, I will leave that largely to Professor Kelly to speak of, but I just note a couple of encouraging points there. Some 2.5 million doses have now been delivered, over 80,000 yesterday. More than 10% now of the population aged over 16 has received their first dose, and that's very welcome. We're also making very positive progress with those Australians aged over 70. As you know, on Monday week, GPs will also be involved in vaccinating those over the age of 50 through their clinics. GPs are now accounting for well over half of the vaccinations done in Australia. Our GPs are doing an absolute Herculean job, not just in administering the vaccine, but I think sitting down with Australians, talking them through the vaccine, giving them the assurance and comfort they need in taking that vaccination. And I want to thank all of our GPs. And I particularly want to thank, as we know, there are so many of our GPs out there of Indian heritage. They're doing a fantastic job. People of Indian descent make up a significant proportion of our health community, our health workforce, whether it's with the doctors and the GPs, or they're working across our health system and our aged care system. And I particularly want to thank them. Once again, while they're concerned about what is happening in their home country originally, and the devastation we're seeing there, here they are here in Australia doing a magnificent job as Australians. National Cabinet has been meeting more regularly, particularly to address the vaccination rollout. We agreed today that having stabilised the rollout We will move now back to our regular cycle of meetings, which is on a monthly basis, and we will do that and convene more regularly as required. Paul.
Thank you, PM. So first, the good news in Australia, again, another 0 day, no deaths and no community cases, and that includes here where we are in Sydney, where there is still that mystery about the 2 cases that have been reported over the last couple of days, the man and his wife, and there's been plenty of discussion about that. I have full confidence in the disease detectives in New South Wales Health, who have always been the leaders in chasing down these chains of transmission and working out what has indeed happened there. But certainly important that anyone in Sydney right now who has been asked to get a test, please get a test. If you've been asked to isolate, please do that. And if you have even the mildest of symptoms, wherever you are in Australia, but particularly in Sydney over the coming days, do get tested, because that's the way we'll find out how this has occurred. The vaccines, I think, PM, you've touched all of the headlines, but just important to note that milestone, 2.5 million. It's continuing to go ahead. It's continuing to accelerate. The numbers every day are increasing. So yesterday, over 81,000 doses were given, including over 50,000 in general practices, our GP respiratory clinics, and the Aboriginal community-controlled sector. That key group, the 2 key groups, if we think about in terms of vulnerability, that we really want to get high amount of doses and high coverage, the over 70s, now over 30% have had their first dose, and so please, if you are in that age group, make that booking, go to your GP. If you have concerns about the vaccine, talk to them about it, but please, the benefit of the vaccine absolutely outweighs any risk, and it's really important, particularly as we've seen with the case in Sydney. This is the time to get that vaccination to protect yourself. In terms of aged care facilities, residents, that's also going extremely well. By the end of the month, first doses will have been given to every single aged care resident. That is our aim, and we're going very well to complete that particular matter. In terms of how we're going with the issue with India, I think and Australians returning. PM has mentioned that. I absolutely stand by the advice I gave to the Health Minister this time last week in relation to that. With the data we had in terms of the increasing cases coming from India, where they have had over 2 million cases per week in the last week, and in the week leading up to that, and this week again, with thousands of deaths, that contrast between their experience and our experience, and I join the PM in putting in my heart going out to people in India and those with loved ones in India, but we had to take that into account to protect Australia, using the data we had last week, and it's working. So we've seen the cases, for example, in Howard Springs decrease from 50 to 21 during that period. That real pressure that was happening in terms of positive cases in our Howard Springs facility has been relieved, and will allow us in the coming weeks, after the biosecurity determination sunsets on the 15th of May, to increase those flights into Howard Springs and bring our Australians home. I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Prime Minister, how quickly do you expect those 900 vulnerable Australians will be repatriated?
Well, we'll work through the details of the manifest for those people who will be able to board on those, what I believe will be 6 flights this month. There will certainly be 3 flights that the Commonwealth is directly involved in, and that involves those flights into Howard Springs. But that's why I'm very appreciative of the very quick response that we had from the states and territories to also take, I expect, what will be at least 3 flights there. And so these are flights of around about 150 people on them. And so whether that will be all because you've got family members, I need to stress, that of vulnerable persons as well, and it's not our practice to splitting up families as they're repatriating back. So those prioritisations will be undertaken by our High Commission and our consular officers there. But this is you don't get 20,000 people back overnight. That's taken us some time to achieve that. In the same way, we've been able to return some 11,000 people back from the UK. that has taken time to work through the processes that we have there. And so, by making available more of these flights, doing it within the capacity of our system, and then we're doing it safely to prevent a third wave here in Australia, but we're doing it sustainably as well. I think people want to know that those flights are going to still be there a month from now, 2 months from now, and that they can make those arrangements. And that's why we're working hard to ensure we do it in a sustainable way and a safe way.
Given Australians who have COVID-19 can't be repatriated, are you comfortable leaving some of those vulnerable people in India?
Well, Australia is not alone in that requirement that we don't do uplift of passengers coming into our country who are infected with COVID. That is a clear border entry requirement. And we'll be holding the line on that, just as we're holding the line when it comes to the biosecurity determination, which was put in place rightly and will run until the 15th of May with no changes. So that's what our High Commission and Consular team do every single day of the week, all the time, not just during COVID, but at any given time. And where there is support that is needed to assist with Medivac, and there are private insurance arrangements as well as other arrangements, our consular team will do what they do every day, providing as much support to Australians in a distressing situation as they possibly can. I stress also there is the hardship fund that we put in place last year. Some 30 million of that fund, in fact a bit more than that, has already been dispersed, not just to people who are affected in India, but in many parts of the world. And have found themselves in a position of distress in terms of being able to return to Australia.
You've spoken obviously about the extra measures the federal government's taking when it comes to quarantine. Did any of the state and territory leaders express a desire for the Commonwealth to take a more active role when it comes to quarantine? And what was their general mood around the India travel ban as well?
I was supported, as I flagged with them last Friday. At National Cabinet, I indicated that I intended to make recommendations and discuss with the Health Minister. Ultimately, that was a decision for the Health Minister based on health advice about taking potentially further action under the Biosecurity Act. That was followed through last Friday, and that was certainly understood, and that has been supported over the course of this week and again today as being an appropriate measure. They're obviously measures for the Commonwealth, they're not measures that are taken by the states and territories, and they respect that that's the Commonwealth's position, but they know that that has put them in a much stronger place today. They had great concerns about the alarming rise in cases being presented on arrival in Australia, and they rightly expected the Commonwealth to take some action to prevent that, which we have done, and that's been appreciated. On the broader issue of quarantine capacity, no, it wasn't a topic of discussion today. There is, as you know, a proposal from Victoria, which I've indicated in my numerous press conferences this week in various parts of the country, that's something we're closely considering. I think it's a very comprehensive proposal. It recognises that state and territory governments would be running such facilities, having the workforce and the other medical capabilities to do that, but we'll assess that, and once we've concluded that assessment and worked something together in an analysis with the Victorian government, then we'll make our view known.
Would you consider another federally run quarantine facility?
Well, that is not a recommendation before us at the moment. It was recommended that we establish one by the Jane Holton Review, and we did. A capacity of 2,000 people up in the Northern Territory, originally established by AUSMAT and now in the process of transferring its operations to the Northern Territory government. I had the opportunity to be there last week, and it's an incredibly well-run facility which has an 100% success rate. But when you move around the rest of the country, they've got a 99.99% success rate with quarantine facilities. And that is an enviable position, I think, for any country in the world. I know that from time to time where there are outbreaks, that can cause real concern in the community, and I understand. But let's not forget that those breaches are a rarity in Australia compared to what we see overseas. And let's not forget, as Professor Kelly was just remarking, it's not just if there's a breach, it's about your other rings of containment that prevent an outbreak. And that is done, in particular, through the testing and contact tracing, which, particularly in New South Wales, they've taken to an elite level. As I'd say, also in Queensland and Western Australia has proved similarly up to the task in recent times in tracking and tracing what had to be done. So it is a series of measures that protects the country from an outbreak.
And quarantine is one element of that. The border closures are another element of that. But the tracing and testing regimes, I think, are also incredibly important, as well as the many other registration processes to support them. So here in New South Wales, Premier, I know has already noted that we do need to see those registration processes using the QR codes get back to their match fit levels that we'd seen for such a long time. And I think what we've seen both in Western Australia and New South Wales recently, they're on it. They've got it, as they have on so many occasions. But they obviously require the continued cooperation of the population, and they've been getting it on every occasion. I'm very thankful to Australians for their patience and calm cooperation when these events occur.
Is it sustainable to continue this level of hotel quarantine for, say, the next 18 months, as your ministers have indicated today, that may be when international travel is still closed for?
Well, so far it's proved to be enormously successful. And that's been over one of the most intense periods of demand and stress on the system. And so we'll continue to assess these as time goes by. I mean, a year ago when we first put these arrangements in place, remembering National Cabinet agreed, Premiers, Chief Ministers agreed that the best way to do this was through state public health orders. So they are administering and enforcing their own public health orders put in place at a state and territory level. We established the National Resilience Facility of the capacity now of 2,000, and if there is further actions that we need to take, then we're certainly considering those. But the suggestion that defence facilities can be used and immigration facilities, they have all been assessed before and they have been ruled out as inappropriate. Those facilities are not available to be used. They're not there just sitting idle and otherwise could be being used for that purpose. That is not the case. And so if there were other purpose-built facilities that would be necessary, then that would be something the Commonwealth would consider, but would need to do that comprehensively and in a very detailed way. That's why I welcome the proposal from Victoria. It is a comprehensive proposal. It is detailed. It does give us something, I think, to consider very carefully.
Last question.
Have you got an indication of the situation in New South Wales, an update for us on the latest COVID case, and have you heard anything about a potential case in Manly?
So I don't have any details on that, but all I know, there was no new cases when the AHPPC met just a few minutes ago that were reported at that time. But of course, they're continuing to do a lot of testing, and people are coming forward to be tested, which is fantastic. And the more that we see, the chances are we may see some more cases, and we certainly need to work out that chain from the person we know arrived on the 24th of April to the Sydney-sider and his wife that have become positive without an obvious link there. But clearly it's the same virus.
Thank you all very much. Sorry, last one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about this concern about the Marrickville sewage detection? I believe it's higher levels than what we've seen previously.
Yes, so the wastewater testing that's done in New South Wales is very reliable and has previously shown when there has been cases. You do need to remember that it's very, very sensitive. So someone who's returned from overseas, for example, has been in hotel quarantine positive but no longer infectious, can still lead to a positive in that wastewater testing. So they'll continue to monitor that as they've been doing for many months.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.